All right, now it's time for our last but not least 1 hour panel discussion of the day. Please help us welcome Amy Schultz and Alexandra Raymond as our panelists and Shivani Ganguly as our moderator for this discussion around sustainable and inclusive finance and how businesses and individuals can balance both impact and profit.
Thank you. So I'm Shivani. We will be talking today about sustainable finance. So in my mind, sustainable finance can mean many different things to many different people. The way that I think about it is that at heart, it's about how we make financial choices that positively impact the planet, our local communities, and our own lives. This can mean for companies, this can mean working with sustainability-oriented companies, including how to raise funding, banking, metrics, and key performance indicators. It can even go down as far as thinking about, how you track things in your accounting systems, and of course, how you impact your employees and other stakeholders, your customers and vendors as well. For personal finance, I think that there's a lot of, obviously, what we're doing every day, what we're drinking, what we're eating, what we're driving, all of those things are personal financial choices that we make that have an impact on sustainability. But to me, it's really about consumer choices and also about investing and where we keep our money and what we support with our money. So that's what we're going to be diving into further today. My background is that I'm a CFO and COO at New Sun Road, which is a climate tech startup in the solar microgrid space. I have a deep experience in finance and operations and sustainability-oriented companies as both a fractional and full-time leader. I have an MBA in sustainable management from Presidio Graduate School, and I've spent the last 20 years working in tech, retail, and CPG companies that are mission-driven. So I'll turn it over to our panelists, Amy and Alexander, to introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into some questions. Amy, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Shivani. Thanks for having me here. I'm Amy Schultz. I am co-founder at Bolder Money. We're the only financial coaching platform that's addressing the emotional side of money to help consumers build wealth. So we primarily work with women and individuals who have been financially underserved and really left behind by the standard of financial advice. We help them pay off debt, build savings, start investing, and we do it by meeting them where they're at and really focusing on their internal relationship with money. So I'm excited to share some insights today from the consumer side.
Alexandra, would you like to go ahead? Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, good morning for everyone on the West Coast. Good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast. I'm really happy to be here and sharing the stage with you wonderful ladies. My name is Alexandra Raymond. I am a finance product manager. So in my 9 to 5, I work in big tech developing financial automation. And then outside of my 9 to 5, I am a FinTech speaker. I speak on the topic of inclusive product design, really advocating and championing to present inclusion as an innovation strategy and really guide the different decisions in terms of like how we're designing financial solution in a way that they can reach more underserved folks that are out there. So yeah, this is me and this is what I do.
Awesome. Thank you. Glad to be here with both of you. So the first question, how can businesses integrate sustainability and inclusion financial practices into their existing financial operations? So Alexandra, we'll start with you for this question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for this question. Well, even before I start talking about, how businesses can incorporate these practices, I think that it's important to start with the landscape, right? We are in an era, in a time where the focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability is more and more in demand, right? It's being demanded by investors, by consumers, and even by the employees that constitute the workforce of these companies. When we think about investors, right, according to the principles for responsible investment assets under management in 2020 reached $103 trillion. So just to show you that this is really showcasing the fact that the financial industry's increasing emphasis on sustainability, and investors are really putting their money behind the movement. There's also the fact of consumer demand. Consumers are demanding companies to offer sustainable solution, right? A Nielsen study found that 66% of global consumers are actually willing to pay more for sustainable products. And so this customer sentiment really drives corporation to, it's actually at the advantage of corporation to be more, to have more sustainable initiatives because consumers are demanding it. And then from the talent attraction and employee side of things, we live in a time where to attract and retain the best talent, large corporations are recognizing the importance of fostering inclusive work environments. And so I really wanted to take the time to kind of like set the tone and let everyone know that we live in a time where incorporating inclusivity and sustainability in the way that we do business is actually something that is not a nice to have anymore. It's a requirement and something that is being demanded by the industry. And so the second thing that I wanted to touch base on is that when we think about in these practices and how to incorporate them in financial operations, it is not the job of one person. It's not the job of one analyst. It's actually the job of the entire ecosystem of the organization to have policies in place and really clearly state that this is something they're doing, have things in place to really make sure that these different initiatives can not only be implemented, but can live in the company for a very long time. So a few things that we think about in terms of steps that are needed to really incorporate inclusive practices in financial operation. Well, first of all, it needs to come from the top, right? Your leadership really needs to be committed to the cause. So ensuring that top leadership is committed to sustainability and those inclusion goals. The second thing is, once leadership has kind of like clearly stated their commitment, having clear policies in place to make sure that, it's not just like words and the company actually applies and means kind of like their sustainable commitment, their promises in sustainable commitments, right? So establishing clear policies outlining the company's commitment to sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these policies should not only be communicated, but they should be also transparently communicated to employees, stakeholder, etc. And then there's also the aspect of metrics, right? We're talking about finance. Having these big ideas, leadership commitment policies is great, but if there's no clear sustainability KPIs that are put in place that are being tracked, then it's kind of futile. And so when we think about, hey, Alexandra, why are you even talking about data tracking and progress measurement? Is because at the end of the day, leadership also wants to make sure that it's tracking the progress that it's making. It's not just, doing this nice to have thing and just like, putting a little bit of money to it. It's also very important for corporations to really communicate the impact of their investment, right? So assessing the impact, making sure that folks are held accountable. It also helps with stakeholder engagement, knowing when you have a workforce and a financial team, knowing that, whatever it is that they're doing is really moving the needle forward can be really impactful in terms of really making sure that your workforce is engaged. And one last thing I wanted to say in terms of, tracking those measures and really showcasing the impact that a company is having is that business owners are not left to themselves in terms of figuring out what data to track. There are actually some pretty cool companies out there that are offering these tools to businesses. One company that I would like to highlight is a company called Dandy. So Dandy is an analytics platforms that companies can subscribe to that will literally give you clear visuals and metrics that you can share with your stakeholders, showcasing those the impact of these D&I strategies that have been implemented. So bottom line, all this to say, it's not the job of one person, it's the job of the entire ecosystem of an organization. We live in a time where it's not a nice to have anymore. Stakeholders, investors, consumers, employees are demanding it. And lastly, when it comes to actually implementing these measures and showing impact, there are some tools out there, there are some startups and companies out there that are developing products that companies can subscribe to really have these metrics, have these beautiful graphs so that they can communicate the impact that they're having.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexandra. Would you mind, for my benefit, spelling the name of the one that you're recommending? I don't know about it, and I'm excited to look at it further.
So it's DANDI. And they actually won a Fast Company Innovation Prize in 2023. So shout out to them, doing cool things.
I will definitely check that out. Thank you. And, from my perspective, working in smaller companies and startups, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think like one thing as you were talking that I was thinking a lot about is culture, and really the importance of embedding diversity and inclusion and impact and being mission driven in your culture, and how much richer that can really make, I think, the work experience for everyone in the company and for our stakeholders. That's something we think a lot about at New Sun Road. We're a very, very diversity, high on diversity, women-led company. With, part of the work that we do is lifting up women in Guatemala and Africa and other places in Latin America with economic development through our solar powered community centers. So that's only part of the work that we do, but I still feel like for us as a company, it's so core to our culture. And I think it's really, in large part what keeps our team driven and around, even though a lot of the work that we do, while also mission driven, doesn't have that social impact piece. So thinking about both social impact as well as climate and other kinds of sustainability, I think is really important in this conversation as well. Something for me that I think about a lot in terms of creating our own culture, both at New Sun Road. I worked there for like 4 years, so it's my most recent experience, but going back many years, it's really about authenticity too. I think we're all so, and I'd love to hear, what you have to say about this, Amy, too, but, greenwashing is such a big thing these days. And as a, no matter what size of the company, really approaching these questions in an authentic way. And I think that comes through, in how we talk with employees, as well as how we talk externally. A couple of other things, like, I think it also is really rich to drive innovation with looking at impact and sustainability. There's so much opportunity for improvement and ways that we can, cut costs and also be more sustainable. Like, I think about that a lot on the supply chains and logistics side, right? Like, do we really have to send this way over there and then back here before we get it out to a customer? Like, we can do things in, much more efficient and sustainable ways if we just put some thought towards our processes and our planning. Also, we are really high on looking at KPIs. We have a dashboard that we've created in a program called Grafana. Sounds like Dandy might be even better, but this is just something we put together, and we can track, all of our actual financial KPIs, our revenue, gross margin, burn rate, all of those really important factors. And then we also look at sustainability metrics. And for us, that's around, carbon mitigation. It's around just even how many sites we are supporting, how many people are being touched by our programs, how we're impacting different kinds of communities. And of course, we also track D&I metrics as well, looking at, our own internal group, as well as some of the communities that we impact. We're able to track some metrics there too. And I think, one thing is to think about also who is the audience for these metrics. Like, we're all like, it's so important to track these things. And I totally agree, it is. But I think it's also important to think about, who's going to use them, how are they using them, what do they want to learn about from looking at this information? I, as a leader in the company, obviously, I want to know what our gross margin is at any moment in time. That's much less important for, many of our stakeholders. So thinking about, funders, customers, employees, leadership, having, maybe slightly different masks or skins of the metrics for them, different ways that we present those. We also do an annual report. We're actually a public benefit corporation. So it's written into our charter that we can, take our decisions looking at impact and sustainability alongside returning shareholder value. I think that's a really important thing to think about also, is like the structure of the company and what your requirements are in that legal structure. So I will leave it there, and Amy, would love to kind of hear your thoughts on, looking at this more from the consumer side.
Yeah.
How does all of this impact you and other consumers?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you brought up the greenwashing, because it made me think immediately, like, consumers are so smart today. Like, they're at the store, they're looking at the ingredients on everything, and they're basically doing the same thing for companies now too. So we'll hold sessions in our community around investing, around like being smart with where your money is going. And the questions we get, which at first surprised us, but we get so many questions around like impact investing, and like, how do you know that a company is doing the things that they say they're doing? Even from consumers who aren't necessarily, who are using like a financial advisor or a robo-advisor for their investments, even if they're not like investing in specific companies on their own. It's now about like their purchasing power, and they recognize that where they're putting their money really matters in terms of the environment, in terms of a lot of the other things that we see. So I think companies are becoming more aware of that too, because it's not just about something that you should do for the sake of doing it. It's like your bottom line is impacted because consumers know and they pay attention. And so a lot of times we'll do a session on impact investing, on like using money for social impact, and those are our most well-attended sessions. And that was something that was surprising to us, but it also, as a company, made us really think, like, before we recommend anything, but we need to make sure that we're walking the walk in terms of all the things that we know are important too. So this is something that we're seeing on all levels, right? We hear the consumers saying it, and then us as a company, we're turning around and making sure that we're doing all the things that you two are talking about, because we're like, our consumers are going to know. Like, it's not enough to just say that you're doing something anymore. You really have to do it in order to be a successful business.
And if I may, I think that Amy said something very interesting in the end that I would like to extend the thought and the comment is, it's not just about saying it, it's about doing it. But there's also something to say in terms of how you say things. And we live in a time where consumers can tell if what you're saying is, pardon my friends, complete BS, or if it's true. During 2020, with everything that was going around, a lot of companies felt like they had to make those empty statements where, like, yes, we're for this, we're for that. And we quickly saw that consumers were not buying it, right? They were like, this company actually, because of the way that they typically do business, because of their supply chain decisions, because of where they choose to open their stores, here they are with this big empty statement, but yet their operations are clearly not aligned with that statement, right? And so, Amy, super important. It's not just about doing, it's about saying, but making sure also that like these two are aligned, because consumers are they will know if this is truthful or not. So yeah, very, very good point of like saying, doing, and then aligning the two.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, one additional thing I'll add, and then we'll go on to the next question. I mean, I agree with everything you're saying about consumers. And I would just say also, even if you're working in a B2B company and you're selling to businesses, ultimately the decision makers there, yes, they might be looking more deeply at numbers and ROI and things like that than a consumer, who may also look at those things, but, usually doesn't. But ultimately, the people who are making the decisions, they're people too, and they care about authenticity, and they care about, hopefully, about climate and sustainability, I think it's important for both B2B and B2C companies to think about these things. Okay, so next question. So what are some common challenges faced by consumers when it comes to responsibly managing their finances? So Amy, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, so this question, it's so funny because I was just talking about this and doing some research on this for a piece that I wrote called the 50-30-20 budgeting method is dead. And the idea behind it is that we used to be able to follow some of this like standard financial advice around money and what we could do with our finances. And that's just not the case. So a lot of people are still looking at old ways of doing things with their money, and it's just making them feel bad. It's making them feel ashamed and like there's something wrong with them. So we have to look at, what are the numbers behind this? Like, what is actually making managing finances so hard for people? And managing finances responsibly. And a lot of it comes back to the changes in the cost of living, right? And the way that things have transformed so much, even just in the past 20 years. So I had pulled some numbers here that I thought were really interesting. One is that, after accounting for inflation, home prices have increased 118% since 1965, and income has only increased about 15% in that time. And so that, to me, that alone is like, it used to be that needs, including your home costs, were 50%. And now it's like, how do I fit all of this in to make it happen? Hospital services are 225% more expensive than they were 20 years ago. I mean, that's a huge number, right? And that's something that's a critical need for people. And in the last 20 years, the balance of outstanding federal student loan debt has increased more than sevenfold. So we're also looking at like the way that employers offer benefits has changed. So people are on their own really saving for retirement more, in terms of like putting money into the 401k, making sure they're getting the match. There's no pensions anymore. So it causes a lot of shame, and people really end up looking at their money in terms of, wow, I have like all this less purchasing power, like things are just not going the way that I thought they were. What am I going to do with it? And so they end up, looking to a lot of tools and things. And with the way that the FinTech world has really taken off, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of different products that they're looking at that cause confusion, or that maybe again are like using outdated budgeting systems. And so consumers are, I think, feeling a little bit lost because of all these challenges with managing their money.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. That's in some ways very upsetting statistics.
Yes, it's disturbing.
Comforting, like when I look at my own life. So thank you. Alexandra, do you want to comment on that?
Amy just, had a mic drop moment with these numbers. These numbers are insane. And quick, shout out to what Amy and her company are doing. It is so important to have organization like Amy's that are making it okay to realize that actually I'm not crazy. The world is changing. My purchasing power is not what it used to be. I'm doing my best. Now that I know this and I acknowledge this, how can I then, do the work to have the education and have the tools to maneuver this new reality that we're living? And so, I just wanted to highlight the importance of what Amy and Boulder Money are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amy, can you share anything that individuals can do to improve their emotional relationship with money to help them to make better financial decisions?
Yeah, and thank you for asking this question, because it's super important always to tie it back to the emotions. I think that's, we don't realize how much of an impact that has on our financial choices, on being able to responsibly manage finances, but 90% of our financial choices are driven by emotion. So we have to be aware of our emotions in order to control our money. We can't really have one without the other. So one of the first things, I'll give 3 things that I think are really important. The first is track where your money is going by emotion, right? Which might seem kind of funny when it comes to talking about money, but I'm always like, let's get into the feelings. That's the important part. We're huge advocates for this at Boulder. So a lot of times we don't realize that we're making purchases out of guilt or like a fear of missing out. and that we're making choices based on emotion instead of what's really best for us. And this could be true with our career decisions, everyday spending, whether we're saying yes or no to an opportunity. And so the interesting thing that we've found is that by focusing on the emotion and where money is going, we're usually able to help people find between $300 to $400 every month, which can then go towards more meaningful goals or more meaningful spending, right? So this is something that we've seen really work in terms of focusing on the emotions around your purchases. And I think that's not something that we're talking about enough for sure. The second is being aware of your money story. So what did you learn about money growing up? What does it mean to you, right? To earn money, to spend money, to have it in the bank based on what you saw your parents do, based on maybe what you saw like your neighbors do or your friends growing up. And the idea is to look at what are the patterns that you see that you're either modeling now or reacting to, right? And maybe doing the opposite. And this is really how we become powerful with money, by understanding why we're doing the things that we do. A lot of times we'll see women doing this reflection and coming out on the other side of it and being like, oh my gosh, like I've been stuck in this low paying job because I didn't feel like it was possible for me to earn more. Or like I've been just getting rid of my money because returning to chaos financially feels normal to me. And so there's very tangible financial implications to not knowing your money story and not being aware of it. And then the third thing is what we're doing right now, which is talking about money, talking about your feelings around money too. So getting an outside perspective. A lot of times with money, we shut down and we internalize it and we make it mean something about ourselves. And the more that we talk about it and realize how not alone we are in those feelings that we're having, the more we open ourselves up to better choices and more opportunities to do better with our money. So those are three things. I mean, and it's a journey too, right? Like go easy on yourself if you're just getting started with this. Sometimes it might take, you might spend months on like recognizing the emotional implications of where your money is going, and then dive into your money story and then start talking about it more. It's definitely a journey.
Awesome. Thank you. I have a off-script follow-up question. I'm curious if you see a difference between, well, I'm sure you do, but what are some of the differences between the way women are emotional about money versus men in your experience?
Yeah, I think it's the willingness to talk about it and be open about it. We actually, like, we have men in our program, we have non-binary individuals in our program, and we see a lot of these same patterns happening. It's just about like the awareness. And a lot of times men grew up seeing themselves in financial roles, seeing themselves in financial conversations, whereas we did not. So there's like this added pressure on us as women to not ever see ourselves in financial conversations and yet figure it out. Like we're born just like knowing how to invest and knowing how to do things with money. So there's this added pressure of like, I'm not supposed to talk about it. I'm not supposed to learn about it. I'm just supposed to know. And a lot of times that's something that we see as different. But for us, it's almost not about gender sometimes. It's about like how willing are you to talk about the emotional side and really look at like how you're feeling about money and the relationship that you have with it.
Awesome. That really resonates. Thank you. So move on to the next question. And I do see some questions
Yeah.
in the chat, and we'll get there in
Cool.
a couple of minutes. We're going to do one more scripted question, and then we'll move to some questions from the audience. So next question, how can businesses and individuals navigate potential trade-offs between financial profitability and environmental and social impact? So I'm gonna kick this one off. So one of the things that I always think about as a finance leader in sustainable companies is that you literally can't have a company, you can't meet your mission if you don't have the money to pay for it. And I know that that seems very, very basic in a lot of ways, and it kind of is. But unfortunately, I've worked with, not in my current company, of course, but I've worked with other entrepreneurs and other funders and people like that who are like, but this is the right thing to do. We always have to, focus on impacts, and we always have to go in that direction, and the money will follow. And that's a lovely idea. And unfortunately, not always true. So I think it's really important to plan out and to think about how you're going to fund your impacts, essentially. And there's a lot of different ways. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is what's called a capital stack, if you're familiar with that term. But basically thinking about, there's lots of different ways that you can fund your company. There's actually lots of different ways you can fund your life also, not just, with income from a job, but there's other ways to fund your life as well. So from a company perspective, though, this can include debt. So that could be bank debt, it could be commercial debt, it could be loans from the government. There's lots of different kinds of debt. There's also, of course, the more traditional like equity fundraising that usually comes from angel investors or VCs, depending on the company stage. And then there's one that's, I think, really helpful to think about for sustainability and impact companies that sometimes gets a little bit forgotten or kind of put in last place, but is grants. So there's a lot of grants that are available both from governments and from corporations to fund mission-driven and impact work for some of the reasons that Alexandra was talking about as well earlier. It's really important for company, like my company works a lot with Microsoft. Microsoft has a lot of initiatives around sustainability and climate change, as you're probably aware. And so one of the ways that they move those initiatives forward is to work with smaller companies and fund projects that they can't really do as Microsoft, but they can provide funding to lots of different other organizations to do that. And so that's a boon for sustainability startups and also for the communities that we work with. But really thinking about, how do you not just get through the next month and pay your bills this month, but have a longer term plan, right? Like how am I, if I want to put in, let's just say from my own experience, 100,000 microgrids in Latin America over the next 5 years, like that's a pretty big initiative. We can't fund that ourselves. We have to work with a whole bunch of other partners and organizations to do that. And, this goes back also to what we were talking about around metrics and tracking and reporting and how we talk about this as well. So I will leave it there. And I'll ask you, Alexandra, to talk about this from your experience. How do corporations navigate these potential trade-offs?
Yeah, and I like that you started with it takes money, because I want to bring the angle of, all right, it takes money. However, as you're waiting for the funding, there are decisions within the company before the funding comes that you can take, as a financial professional, as a business professional, to move the needle forward. It won't move it as, as you won't make as big the leap without the funding. However, there are steps that you can take today in your financial operations decisions, right? I think that you did touch base on some of these points earlier, but when we think about supply chain decision, right? Who are you buying from? Who are the partners that you're partnering with? When you think about your 3PL and your distribution, are you choosing distribution centers that are close? Are you deciding to choose one that is, I don't know, all the way in another country, but then not taking into consideration all the damage of transporting goods from one point to another? So supply chain decision is somewhere where, hey, your head of supply chain can start making those small decisions that could have an impact on, this sustainability promise. There's also, when it comes to, financial planning and analysis, looking at cost efficiencies, there are ways to choose innovative, cost-efficient ways where, of course, if we're thinking about like, hey, what light bulb are we buying today? Yeah, we could. There is a case to be made that this light bulb might cost a bit more today. However, in the long run, it will actually last us. So it's a long-term, cost-effective decision. And this light bulb is way better in terms of making a sustainably conscious choice or whatnot. And then there's, in terms of reporting, right? There's this concept called the triple bottom line approach, where as you're going through your financials, instead of just presenting the normal metrics of, oh, let's look at, revenue, gross, net, EBITDA, or whatnot, have a section of your presentation as an FP&A analyst where like, hey, this is how we're tracking in terms of this is how we're tracking in terms of that, and really trying to make these connections between what leadership really wants to see in terms of number, and then tying these numbers to the impact that it's having on these sustainability promises. And so Yes, it does take investment. It does take leadership buy-in. However, I do want to make sure that, FP&A analysts, supply chain, people in procurement, and in all these different functions of the finance org do feel empowered to take these micro actions that eventually could compound into a bigger effect.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, again, for me, it comes back to setting that culture and setting that as like an imperative in the culture, and yeah, like really empowering people to do that. Thank you. Amy, can you share some ways that individuals can find this balance and things that they might do to maintain it?
Yeah, I love this question because it's actually one that comes up a lot, which is like I want to be making sure that I'm buying the most sustainable products, that I'm like getting this exactly right. And for some people, they're just starting on their money journey of like looking at managing their finances responsibly. And so unfortunately, sometimes they think like, I have to go all in on like making sure that everything I'm doing has the social impact that I want. And that can be something that isn't necessarily fitting into their current means right now, right? And so I always think about, I don't remember where I heard this, but in terms of sustainability, in terms of environmental social impact, I heard once that we don't need 6 billion people to do it perfectly. We need like millions of people to at least do it imperfectly. And so that's something that I always come back to, is that if we take the pressure off of ourselves to do everything perfectly when we're just starting out, it means what are the things that are most important to me and how can I fit those in to kind of try to find that balance, and then let go and know that like I'm gonna get it perfectly eventually, but I'm just starting out. And I think that's true maybe for early stage businesses as well, is like thinking about what are the areas that are most important for you to get this right? What are the areas where you can have a plan around this and then ease into it as needed based on, how things are going. But also for consumers, being intentional is so important, not only for your personal finances, but for the impact that you want to have. And there's so much purchasing power. And I think, a great example of this is like what we saw with Taylor Swift and Beyonce over the summer, where they brought in these amazing concert series and so much money was passed around, right? When people really want to spend on something and it's important to them, they will find a way to do it. So we get to take a second look at where our money is going and just be really intentional about it.
If I may, I want to add one thing to the conversation because it came to mind when I think about this conversation is centered around what businesses can do, what individuals can do, but there's also the reality of what policymakers and governments can do. I think that there's the very important point of accessibility to these products and accessibility to being able to make these decisions. I do want to mention that, in this panel, we're very fortunate to live in, well, at least for me, and I'm assuming Amy and Shivani, in big cities where I can choose to go to either, Trader Joe's or Target if I want to, or Whole Foods or Trader Joe's if I want to. And unfortunately, for a lot of Americans today, it's not as easy because these options are not as accessible to them. So just kind of like to complete this conversation on doing the right thing, Amy kind of like nailed it when it said it's not about getting it perfectly, it's about imperfectly taking action, right? Where some of the folks watching being here with us or watching the replay might live in a city where they're like, hey, it's actually not as easy for me as a business owner or as an individual to make these choices because where I live, it is actually quite not accessible for me to make these trade-offs or whatnot. And so it is important to bring in the conversation, the concept of policymakers, mayors, government entities to also be active players in this conversation on sustainability, diversity, and inclusion, so that all Americans who decide to be active participants and all business owners who decide to be active participants actually can have easy access to implementing these solutions that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Alexandra. Well, I think unless either of you have any other comments at this point, we're going to move on to some questions from the audience. So if you'd like to ask any other questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. I'm going to start with a couple that I see here now. So this is a question for Amy. How do early stage entrepreneurs manage money and burn rate while bootstrapping?
Yeah, this speaks to my heart right now. Also, it's funny. I did a talk for an organization called Day One, where they help new founders like really get started and form their business ideas. And one of the things the founder and I were talking about is how, which has kind of been a theme that's come up here, we think we have to like dive in and do everything perfectly right away and like, be earning the money we need right away. And that's not always the case. It's okay to be an early stage entrepreneur with a really amazing idea and a product that you want to build or service that you want to have, and be, in a position where you have to make money elsewhere while you are doing that. I think that's something that's not talked about. And I see a lot of like business coaches and people who are saying like, yeah, go from 0 to 10K in 1 month. And that's just not always the case, right? And so I think we have to normalize like there's a non-traditional path where sometimes entrepreneurs don't start out with a ton of money, and they do have to get creative about how they're bringing in money while they're building the thing that will be their main stream of revenue, or one of them. And then the other way is finding the right people who understand your mission and who are going to be kind of all in with you and be working on, the less attractive sexy parts of business while you're getting things up and running, I think is really important. Especially just thinking about, my co-founder and the things that we work on together. Like I don't know that there's anybody else who would be willing to be in the mess with me, and not having that person alongside me, I'd probably have to spend a lot more on finding the right people. So when having a team is something where like the sole founder, the sole entrepreneur doesn't necessarily have to be how it is.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, definitely agree. Having side gigs and other income to help is really important. I've done that myself quite a lot. Here's a question for Alexandra. How does lean product design fit into going to market faster? Do they exist together or separate?
Yeah, well, I believe that lean product design and going to market faster, actually they go hand in hand, right? So when we think about lean product design, it's really the idea of the design process where you're highly focused on creating something that's consumer centric while eliminating waste in the process, right? And so when you're so focused on that what you're developing is consumer centric, I do believe that it makes for a process that it's way more efficient, with way less iteration along the way, which contributes to going to market faster.
Thank you. I think this is a question for all of us, but Alexandra, maybe I'll ask you to start. What's your biggest challenge when it comes to responsibly managing your finances?
Yeah, that's a good one. Glad to go first. My biggest challenge when it comes to responsibility, I think that for me, and Amy touch base on this, is breaking the narrative of how I should be managing my finances, right? Having, a bachelor's in finance, I learned that this is the way you do it, and these are the percentages, and this is what you're supposed to be doing. And then you quickly realize that I quickly realized that if I wanted to stick to the old ways of budget allocation, it actually didn't work. And so I had to unlearn all these things and learn that, all right, well, it's okay if it's not like 50, 30, 20, maybe it's, I don't know, like 40, whatever other budget allocation or whatnot. So for me, it's really the challenge of unlearning a lot of these like classical financial concepts that I always believed that I had to adhere to, and really making sure that my new budget allocation, system allocation or whatnot is in line with the way that I want to live my life, and also the way that I want to make sure to build a very financially healthy, wallet. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Amy?
Yeah, I think like people always expect me to be like nothing, like I do it perfectly well. But the truth is my kids coupled with being a startup founder. So I think, as a founder, you don't you're so focused on your business that sometimes like you're doing more of the convenience ordering, right? Of like things to save time, like whatever it is, that's where my money will go sometimes. And I have to stop and think like, do I really not have time to go to the grocery store today, or can I just like relax and like go and take an hour? And then yeah, my kids are little, so they're 4 and 6, and childcare was expensive. Everything that is kid related or Disney related is marked up so much because the kids talk us into buying it and we're just suckers for like whatever they want. So finding that balance is something that's honestly like I still work on it with the kids, especially in the spending on them.
Yes, I also have a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
Yes.
They want everything all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, that's also definitely a big challenge. And I think, also kind of resonating with what Alexandra said, like I've been working in accounting and finance for my whole life, basically, like since I was a teenager, quite literally. And it wasn't probably until like maybe 10, like I was like, I should just be good at personal finance. And it wasn't, it's just not the same. And it took me a while to realize like, oh, I should probably like actually learn about personal finance versus just business finance. And yes, there's a lot. I'm definitely still learning a lot. And then I think, the other thing I would say, which I'm sure is impactful for everyone here and everyone in the US, at least probably in the world, is inflation, and just realizing that over the past year, like even though theoretically I've gotten raises and things like that, it's not keeping up with the pace. So and trying to understand like, well, how do I what levers can I pull, and what are things that I really can't or really don't want to, and working through the emotional side of that piece too. Okay, one last question from the audience. What is the most enjoyable and least enjoyable thing about working in the impact or sustainability space? Amy, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I think the most enjoyable thing is obviously the impact, right? When I try to go places where I can see some of our members in person sometimes, just if I need like a pick me up, because they come up to me and they tell me about the change that it's had on their lives. And that for me is like, yeah, okay, this is worth it. We have to keep going, and we have to do this for a million more people. The least enjoyable is definitely meeting people who don't understand that the impact is important and it's a good move for business. Like it's not just that I'm a woman on a mission. Like I'm a woman on a mission who's building a profitable company. And so having those conversations where they think it has to be one or the other is just like, this is so old school and not true and uncomfortable. And that's my least favorite part.
Agree. Thank you. Alexandra?
Yeah, I'm going to echo the in-person impact as being the most enjoyable part of it. As a speaker, I really enjoy hosting a workshop where everyone's engaged. People are surprised by the statistic, they're surprised by the numbers, and then based on this, they actually want to know more and they participate. And I'm able to kind of like plant some seeds as I go and as I speak on the topic of presenting inclusion as an innovation strategy, and vice versa. I think the most difficult part for me is presenting inclusion as an innovation strategy. A lot of times I will get challenged by, okay, but why does it even make sense? Or, okay, but like D&I is really HR. Why do you call yourself a FinTech speaker? And really having to explain that at the end of the day, so many folks have the purchasing power to do the right thing. The numbers don't lie. The purchasing powers of the Black communities, the Latinx community, of people with disability, of the LGBTQIA community, these folks have the purchasing power. They are demanding things, and it is essential to make business sense of inclusion so that these folks can actually translate their will into dollars that will impact the bottom line of your company. And so a lot of folks don't understand this, challenge this, and this is kind of like the difficult part when they don't see it. But at the end of the day, numbers don't lie, and I always try to come equipped with statistics and numbers, ideally numbers that start with billion, trillion, to really show that at the end of the day there is a way to have a positive impact on the bottom line if you're doing the right thing.
Thank you. For me, I mean, I think, it almost goes without saying that the impact and mission part is just so important. It's what gets me out of bed every day, and it's what gets me through, what can be sometimes somewhat, tedious or, kind of feel like it's not that important work. But when I look at that work through the lens of the impact that it makes on customers and employees and the world, then I feel much better about that time and how I'm spending it. So that helps a lot. I think, while I also resonate with what Amy and Alexandra have said about, kind of the pushback piece and the dismissive piece, or dismissive response that I think we probably all sometimes get. The immediate thing that's springing to mind, especially since we're talking about both personal and sustainable and business finance, is that frankly I have taken a pay cut to work in climate tech and mission-driven companies and startups over the years. If I had chosen to stay in sort of more traditional tech, I'd probably be making a lot more money. Just based on what the market tells me anyway. So that to me has been challenging for sure. And, to continue to make that choice, like I feel strongly about that choice. And, as Amy was mentioning also, like I have a child, and that has made me feel even more strongly committed to working on climate change. But at the same time, to recognize that I am making that trade-off, and, goes back to the emotional piece of what we're talking about here too. So. All right, well, thank you so much for the questions from the audience. We're going to move on to the last piece of our agenda today, which is some rapid fire questions. So what I'm going to do here is ask each Alexandra and Amy about 3 questions, and we'll just ask you to take just, pretty quick responses, like, words or a sentence, but not paragraphs, please, just to keep us going. So we'll start with Alexandra, if that's okay. In one word, what is the biggest barrier that prevents people from advancing financially?
I would say education.
Name one game-changing impact FinTech product that was launched in the past 3 years.
So there's an app called Green Invest, a sustainable investment platform to encourage eco-friendly portfolios.
Awesome, thank you. One company you think has successfully integrated ESG into its financial strategies?
Unilever.
What's one word that describes the future of social impact finance?
To me, it's collaboration.
Name a prominent figure or leader in sustainable finance who has inspired you in your career.
I would say Kate Brandt, the Chief Sustainable Officer at Google. Google has some pretty amazing folks doing great things. There's Kate Brandt, and there's also Annie Jean-Baptiste, who's head of product inclusion, again, at Google. So 2 phenomenal women.
Awesome, thank you. Amy, your turn. So what's your favorite personal finance book or resource that you'd recommend to others for financial empowerment?
Yeah. So for empowerment, I love We Should All Be Millionaires by Rachel Rogers, specifically because she really focuses on the idea of like earning more. A lot of times we think about restriction when it comes to finances and doing the right thing, and we need to open up and earn more.
Awesome. Name one common financial myth or misconception that you'd like to debunk right now.
Yeah. If you are somebody who struggles to like stick to a budget or save money or pay off debt, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not a bad person. You don't deserve the shame that you're feeling. It's just that you haven't been, taught money in a way that's actually helpful for you. So take some of that blame and shame off of yourself.
Thank you. In one sentence, share your top tip for someone trying to save money effectively.
This is a tough one. Change the narrative from your money going out and then seeing what's left over to save to paying yourself first and focusing on you.
Share one financial mistake from your past and the lesson you learned from it.
Yeah, so I was a big emotional spender before, which is what I guess catapulted me into discovering money coaching and starting this business. So I don't regret it, but the lesson that I learned is that having a degree in finance, having financial literacy is not always enough.
And what do you think is the biggest barrier that prevents people from advancing financially?
I think the biggest barrier is the way that money is so tied to our identity and to all of these other things and the pressure that we put on ourselves and the inability to advocate for ourselves around money. I think honestly it's like this big pressure that we feel, and not being able to address those feelings just keeps us stuck in this small position where we're not moving forward.
Makes sense. Well, thank you. So I think we're going to wrap up here. It's really been a pleasure doing this with both of you, and I feel like I've learned a lot as well. So if either of you has any last words, please feel free. And otherwise, we will thank the audience and also really thank Wallet Max for putting this panel together and for all of the preparation and support. Thank you.